It's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Jennifer Bonner to SCI-Arc. Already the title of the lecture is promising. I was thinking in the context of the work of Jennifer, one of the most common conversations, but at the same time a little bit underrated, is that in many ways the architecture discourse or the architecture speculation is a collective cultural construction. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. And Jennifer, through his teaching as a director of the MR2 program in Harvard, and the founder and principal of MODELI, her firm, and as an editor and writer, so he does what we like to think is the right way to do architecture. He's a cultural practitioner. But it also occurred to me that her work, and I never think it's an interesting idea to make in generation, and I don't think it is, but I think it touched on concepts and subjects that other people in the field are exploring one way or another. But I think what separates her work for some of the colleagues that are floating around the same oceans, it has to do with the attitude. And I think her attitude is a playful one, but it's seriously playful. I mean, not playful in a banal way, but playful in a sense to reivindicate the pleasure of architecture as an opportunity to elevate things that sometimes we may overlook or we don't pay attention carefully. But again, it's, I think, the sense of humor and the sense of almost like a British 60 Monty Python thing. I always, in my head, Monty Python and Archigram are always the same thing, which is unfair, I would think, to Monty Python. But there is something about that spirit, and even with Cedric Price and other ones, and I'm not saying that her work is related directly to that, but I'm talking about the attitude. And I think attitude is an issue that probably in the context of academic environments we'll tell to don't talk too much about it. There is something about that we think kind of almost personal interests or personal signatures or personal desires that were rooted very early on in our lives doesn't seem to channel that. But I like to think that in her work there is a lot of that. And I think that's what makes, from my point of view, her work very unique within that context. So I'm very intrigued by the title of the lectures. I'm really looking forward how she would ensemble it into the cultural speculation that I think her work does. So I think it's an interesting addition and a very provocative contribution to what I think a whole series of lectures that we have this semester with people that have been talking about some of these issues. But you'll see, I think, that her attitude put it in completely different context in terms of graphic, colors, materials, everyday things, funny things, fun objects, which again, these are not subjects that are strange to our ears, but certainly I think her work takes it to a different dimension that hopefully can contribute to a whole different angle in how we can appreciate architecture. So, without further ado, please welcome Jennifer Bonner to SCI-Arc.
Thanks so much, Hernan, for the introduction. That was really nice to hear. And thank you to the students who I think formally invited me here. And I just want to say a quick hello to friends that came tonight and former collaborators. It means a lot to see you all here. So I've been giving a lot of talks in the past year, as Hernan said, on materiality, drawing, color. This is exactly what I was going to say, and my first house. But I was particularly looking forward to the talk tonight at SCI-Arc because I think SCI-Arc is a school of architecture that I have a deep admiration for. But I have to say, I applied for a job here 10 years ago, and y'all didn't give me one. But I still love you. And you all know this already, but I think it should be underscored that the work of the students and faculty is most definitely intensifying representation and the visual culture of architecture while also spatializing it. And last week I was on the other coast trying to have a discussion with the art critic Dave Hickey on his essay titled American Cool, where he says that Americans are cool and Europeans use irony, and Europeans can never be cool. And so he's really talking about the artist of Southern California. And I think channeling Hickey, I was thinking that maybe SCI-Arc is the only institution that has a real capacity to own a pedagogy on cool. And I mean, because you guys already do cool pedagogy, and it's very important. So I just wanted to kind of say those things. Tonight's talk, A Dollhouse with a Grilled Cheese and Other Ideas for Architecture, is really paring down all of the work that you see now on the slides. But I want to talk primarily about two projects tonight, Best Sandwiches and this work on roofs. It's interesting to note that these two projects are about a kind of cute collection of objects and forms. The recipe for making work relies on multiples, and so there's many sandwiches or hats, not just one. And if I could unpack a capital P project for Mall, I would probably put all bets on the ordinary and what I'm calling the contractor canon, found in domestic hats, which is on the left, and Haus Gables on the right. Obviously, ordinary architecture is not my term, but used by many others to advance the discipline, and I see the work kind of sitting within that lineage. So my work often begins with a question rather than a sketch. It relates directly to popular culture. It's graphic. It takes cue from art practice. As we know, academic practices tend to misbehave in architecture more so than professional practices. And so I think it's important to place emphasis on the role of gallery installations, research, publications, and experiments like this one, that it's kind of our lifeline and ultimately the instigator of the building at the end of the day. So tonight you'll see things like 1,700 square feet of glitter stucco, faux finishes, and 3 representational models. So jumping right into the two projects, the first one is called Best Sandwiches, and it's concerned with extrusions and questions how architecture and sandwiches stack. And this work, I think, was originally published in your magazine, Off-Ramp, or your online journal. And I think it takes a certain amount of sandwich know-how to make an architectural stack. So seen here, traditional English tea sandwiches represent precise, orderly stacks. So cucumber and cream cheese are neatly layered to form a clean stack, and ingredients between 2 pieces of white bread. Don't forget to cut off the crust. In the illustrated, cartoonish version of the Dagwood sandwich, large quantities of cold cuts, sliced cheese, vegetables, and condiments stack up to an enormous pile, and warning, it's too big as a single bite. With even messier tendencies, the Sloppy Joe, a loose meat sandwich, combines tomato sauce and minced beef between a hamburger bun. It's more piled than stack, and the middle layers spill out onto the plate. And this is obviously the cheap and cheerful kind. Switching back to the iconic stack, the club sandwich, it alternates between ingredients, cold cuts, cheese, veggie, and then the bread is toasted and the sandwich is quartered off into triangular pieces, underscoring the colorful section. Please hold the mayo. And then finally, this is probably everyone's favorite, the grilled cheese, best described as a melted stack and often diagonally cut into 2 halves, exposing the sandwich's 2 ingredients in a BCB pattern, bread, cheese, bread, and cheddar, of course. So clearly the sandwich is ubiquitous in popular culture. Everyone's vying for the best pastrami or claiming the best hamburger. Yet I'm interested in 3 versions of the sandwich. The first one is obviously these tendencies around its cultural obsession. The second would be someone's work like Klaus Oldenburg's giant BLT from the 1960s. And lastly, the third is a desire that we take the sandwich and it stacks beyond the metaphor. And people always take pictures with their sandwiches. I'm glad there's like laughing. I just want to say SCI-Arc's visuals, the colors are amazing. This is the best place I've ever lectured, so I'm really happy about the colors tonight. Color and glitter are important when making the stack. Color in combination with the deployment of many types of apertures are intentional. They promote the legibility of repeating layers. The sandwich stack offers multiple grounds, as a result, multiple elevations. In architectural stacks, there's no longer a single ground upon which a unified figure sits. Instead, these stratified buildings propose a multiplicity of elevations in a series of horizontal figures versus the straightforward north, east, west, south orientations of the past. So with endless stackable combinations, sandwich architecture results in many north faces, for example, all stacked up rather than the singular elevation. And so oftentimes I work with a food photographer named Adam Detour in Boston. And so I bring the models over to his studio, and he has all these plates and platters, and it just works out well when I'm working on sandwich architecture. And then the project was exhibited in the Pink Comma Gallery in Boston a couple of years ago. These are some of the images. The drawings are digitally fuzzy. The exploded elevations show off all the sandwich layers. And then last year, there was an ambition to try to turn best sandwiches, specifically a BLT, into a speculative office tower. And so this is it. Office stack is a mid-rise tower that speculates on how floor plates might stack and be shared and connected via many kind of circulatory atria. And so tenants get their own facade, their own identity, their own layer. And this is an example of some of the kind of mini atria. And then the floor plan is square, but there's an idea that you could maybe try to draw or bite out some of the corners, and that starts to make these kind of corner terraces. Okay, so this is the next project. It's a bit longer. So I'm going to describe the work on roofs and Haus Gables through 3 representational models. So first up is the massing model. The second one is going to be the Dollhouse model, and the third is the one-to-one model. So the massing model really takes on this question of ordinary architecture, which we all know is overlooked. It's kind of the throwaway and the stuff that is immediately accessible, but then tossed aside. And so I'm asking the question, how can we flip the ordinary into a representational project? And when I say ordinary, I'm really talking about the kind of contractor fuck-ups or the contractor canon. And it's all things that pertain to the roof, and the lingo goes like this: eaves, ridges, valleys, rakes, soffits, gables, hips, and dormers. One of the literary references for the contractor stockpile is Hawthorne's House of Seven Gables, and the hashtag is domestic hats. And if we consider the contractor as a geometrist for a moment, then it's possible to think that these 2x6s in wood frame construction, we could think of it as a project of planar inclination. And I might go as far as to say that these geometries are the American version of the contemporary cathedral, which was obviously all about the roof. In the contractor stockpile, these are the pitches that we see, so they're usually 3 to 12, 7 to 12, 9 to 12. And you'll see in Haus Gables, I'm going above 12 to 12, so all the pitches are much steeper. And here's the kind of straightforward catalog of sheds, dormers, gables, etc. And I think they're so commonplace that we kind of overlook the spatial possibilities that these roof types begin to produce if we think about the interior. Current modes of construction from the contractor camp promote building vented roofs, which is on the left. Yet the unvented roof allows a visual connection to what might be deemed attic geometry. And so what happens in the attic stays in the attic. We never see these spaces in a lot of like typical houses. And so in the next few slides, I'm gonna try to do a close reading of these roofs. And for a minute, I'm kind of ignoring the 2x6 aesthetic and just trying to read these forms as the banal massing models or volumes that they are. So this one, and there's going to be a quiz right after it. So figure 1 demonstrates how a gable roof is covered by a hip roof. Figure 2, 2 intersecting gables with offset and misaligned shed roofs. Do y'all see it? Figure 3, chamfered triple hips with asymmetrically extruded gables, of course. And then figure 4, stacked and stretched and clipped gables, also known as the gable stack. So I have like hundreds of these, and I won't bore you for the rest of the night, but the research in Atlanta began by taking a sampling of 50 houses throughout the city, and I'm cutting through 8 different neighborhoods. And we started to notice something really quickly, that there's a tendency that's at play, that firstly, the roof geometries in more affluent neighborhoods have convoluted, elaborate, and complex roofs, while lower socioeconomic neighborhoods have more humble roof lines. And so there's a decision here to render them all white. And so I'm using abstraction to kind of visually kill the shutters and the windows and the ordinary construction methods. And so this abstraction points us to another potential construction method. Object 21 on the top is in a neighborhood called Buckhead. And so that's kind of a mashup of like 9 different roofs that's covering like a 6,000 square foot house. And then on the extreme opposite end, object 41 is from a neighborhood called Cabbagetown. And so that's a shotgun house with a hip plus a single extruded gable. And so as the recipient of the Young Architects Forum's Emerging Voices Award, I was like teaching in Atlanta at Georgia Tech, and I got a phone call that said I had won. And I hadn't actually applied for an award, so I was like, what is this award? And they said, well, you get to make an installation of your work in a gallery. And I was like, well, I don't have any work. So then they dumped this like 10,000 square foot gallery on and said, well, here's the gallery and it's due in a couple of months. So it was really this moment to like push and think about how the massing model could be useful for a one-woman band with no work. And so the show is about 16 large massing models. They range, I mean, the height is like 5 feet by 3 foot by 3 foot. And we're really absorbing all the lessons learned in the banal kind of formal reading. And so obviously we're using all the tricks, distortion, rotation, we're incrementally scaling. And so they're trying to be new forms, but we all know them and recognize them. So what happens when an A-frame no longer sits snugly with the adjoining gable? Or when a hip roof no longer sits symmetrically as the primary volume? And so again, like this collection, this is 12 all viewed at once from the top view. And I think this body of work rethinks the role of the massing model in architectural representation because, as we know, massing models are usually small in size and result of the iterative design process by the architect. They represent the schema or the diagram or the proto-architecture. But domestic hats delights in the tendencies to engage multiples and rejects the constraint of smallness. And so when we're scaling up to try to make a massing model, we're always told you have to add more detail. And so we're trying to deny that detail and not add it in. And so these massing models, didn't fit in our car. They didn't fit in the wire cutter. They don't fit on a conference room table. They're large. And this is opening night in that gallery that I showed before. And so we're lighting each model differently. So sometimes we're like lighting the top of the roof, and then the elevation is in shadow, or sometimes we're lighting all three surfaces. And then after the show, the idea is to take the models out of the gallery and then drag them back out into the city and drop them off as yard art in the front yards of the original houses that we sampled. We were also trying to get Michelle Nunn to become the seat in the U.S. Senate. Didn't work out that year. This is like one of those shotgun houses in Cabbagetown. And then this is like the perfect one, right? Because this is the moment when the domestic hats meets its like one-to-one match, when the 2x6s are clad over and we see the massing model, and then the domestic hats like as a present on the front porch. Okay, so the second model is the Dollhouse model. If the larger conceptual project can be loosely thought of as working on all three models, and the first one's really about representation, this one's also about representation, but it's kind of dialing in more stuff. And so here I'm taking on materials and the possibility for a different kind of spatial paradigm. At 1 to 12 scale, these materials are graphic, they represent pop, they're not what they seem. And so the Dollhouse was made out of Baltic birch plywood, nothing really important, but in reality, I'm going to build the house out of cross-laminated timber panels. And so right now I'm trying to I know the house is already cut up into 87 different panels, but the idea was not to make a model to represent that construction sequence, but to cut a seam in one of the elevation and put brass hinges on and open up the doors. And so if we think about the paradigms of the past that we're all using, the free plan, the ROM plan, Haus Gables and the Dollhouse model starts to try to push in something that we're calling the roof plan. So this is not a top-down orthographic drawing seen in a set of building permits, but potentially this is a paradigm or ideology that can be used by many people, and maybe we can start to rethink the way we make space. So the first floor plan's on top, and it looks like it has nothing to do with the roof, but in actuality there's two double height spaces, and then it starts to, you can see the kind of canted wall, it's doing something very little there. On the second floor plan, which is on the bottom, the roof consumes the plan, right? So it's starting to make roof rooms and discretize and dominate the plan logic. So sometimes ridge lines die into corners, and you can start to see, it's like connect the dots a bit. And then in the sections, if you look at the one on the far left, this is where you kind of see that roof room. So the room upstairs is being hung by the larger roof above. And so just to note that this project is sited in the American South, and it undertakes a very old tradition of faux finishing. And so for Southerners, there's a history of not being able to afford precious materials with a subsequent desire of faking it. And so this is the Southern Institute of Faux Finishing in Brandon, Mississippi. It's a real place. And the ambition is on the right, which is to have it's really a porcelain bathtub, but it looks like faux marble. And so I'm thinking about faux finishes both at the scale of the building on the exterior, but also on the interior. I also need someone like Mary Corse and her white light paintings from the late 60s, where for the first time someone's painting with hundreds, thousands of glass beads. And these are the ordinary glass beads that you can buy from or you can see from the Department of Transportation that makes the reflectivity on the road striping. And so in the studio, I'm trying to figure out how to make, I'm trying to make fake bricks or fake wood. I haven't figured out which one's gonna work. And so these are our tools. Some's like low tech, it's like a stamp. And the other one's like CNC milled. And I have a bunch of glass beads. And so we make a mock-up that's like 4 foot by 4 foot. It's really hard to photograph, but it's reflective with light. This is the faux bricks installed on site at Haus Gables. So the left is at dusk with my phone, and then the right is with a flash. And so when I was trying to call around subcontractors in Atlanta to see who could like possibly pull off this fake brick with that I'd been working hard on. One of the subcontractors says, "Oh, we've already done that on an Arby's down the road." And so, of course, I was like very disheartened up at Harvard because we hadn't even found that white fake bricks were already a thing. But I proceeded anyways, and what Arby's doesn't have that Haus Gables has is like glitter and reflectivity. So this is the product. It's a sticker. Let's think of it as a sticker. It's put on, and then they trowel on the last layer of stucco, which is like 1/8 of an inch. And then we're doing something called a dash finish, and that's when we're using a hopper to blow the glass beads in. And so you can see the sticker or the template or whatever at the scale of a 55-foot-long house. So there's a little concern when doing this, like what are the neighbors gonna freak out that's like this glittery, glowing thing right next door. So the faux finishes are also happening, obviously, on the interior. So the house, as mentioned, is built out of cross-laminated timber, which has a very strong aesthetic, probably located in like Scandinavia. And remember, this house is in Atlanta, so it can't really, it needs to push back on the Scandinavian image. And so the faux finishes are distributed in each of the different rooms. They're all different, so each room gets a different finish. And I'm calling them faux because the terrazzo is not poured in place and polished. It's a tile that's picked out and bought and laid like as a tile. So you get things like black terrazzo sitting next to cheaper materials like vinyl flooring that's used in hospitals. So that's the yellow room. And that kind of looks like marble to me. And then another room might have or the stair has OSB, an image of OSB. It's not OSB board, it's a tile from Spain. The Spanish are really funny right now. They're making weird ceramic and porcelain tiles out of strange images. And so at various corners in the house, you might get an intersection of vinyl, ceramic tile, and terrazzo. And this is an image of the faux finishes installed. This is one of my favorite shots, which is showing that roof room hanging from the larger roof above. So just to note, the roof is acting as a folded plate, and then the room is hanging. So you get this like kind of perfect gable view of that bedroom. And then the faux finishes are mapped onto each space such that they are not caring about what's happening in the next room. But then weird stuff like this happens where you're standing here and like the finishes in the bedroom kind of line up with the finishes in the hallway. And then the faux finishes are directional, right? So this is the catwalk overlooking that yellow room, and we get an interaction with the living room with this blue kind of confetti rubber tile. In the bathroom, there's two bathrooms. I'm using the same product or tile. It's a cartoon drawing of marble. I think this one's Spanish or Italian, I'm not sure. Pink is on the bottom and gray is on top, and then downstairs I'm flipping that, so gray's on the bottom, pink's on top, so there's a sectional conversation in the bathrooms. This is the black terrazzo, so that rises up to become this backsplash, and then on the other side of the room it's like 10 inches tall. And then these are pictures that I found on Instagram that I like. Okay, before moving into the last model, I'm just going to say something about site for a minute. Obviously, the site is the pink one, and then they're building all these houses really close. This is an in-town neighborhood, and each lot is 24 feet wide with a 3-foot setback, and so the next house is 6 feet away. And then behind the houses is a warehouse, and behind that is something called the Beltline. And the Beltline is this pedestrian bicycle path that's making a circle around the city, and it's cutting through like 45 different in-town neighborhoods. The New York Times called it a glorified sidewalk. Thank you, New York Times. But it's actually helping the situation, which is like Southerners outside walking in a city that, you know, they usually aren't walking. I can say that because I'm a Southerner. And so I just want to like swipe all that roof stuff away and just say I kicked everything out, eaves, dormers, everything. And at some point in a project, you have to decide what you're going to move forward with. And so I picked gables, and there's 6 of them, and they are different peaks and different pitches. And now we're at the 1-to-1 model. And so this is the erection, on-site erection sequence of the construction of the CLT. And so if you squint your eyes, you kind of see pieces of foam core or chipboard or whatever's on our desk that we can assemble on our desk. We can assemble it live 1-to-1 on site. The 1-to-1 model requires a 40-ton crane, which is parked on that next lot. And then we need the other lot to hold all the CLT panels. Again, there's 87 in total, and the house went together in 14 days' time with a 4-person crew. It's really like putting an IKEA cabinet together with screws. The complicated thing was there's 4 structural engineers, one in London that did the concept, Hanif Kara of AKT, and then one in New Hampshire. They did a design assist package, and then they're farming out the numbers with a PhD in mass timber called Fire Tower, and then there's an engineer in Atlanta working on the concrete box. And so this is after, at the end of day 1, and it was like very exciting moment because it looked like half the house was built, and it went fast. And then it starts getting slower as you move up the house, and especially when you get to the roof. But so we made 87 drawings, which showed the construction sequence. And so if there's 87 panels, there's 87 drawings. And on top of that, the engineer starts to draw in the details of the connections or how two panels are assembled. He's specifying the screw length and also the screw pattern. And so the installer is from Seattle, Washington, and he doesn't have a computer on site. He's looking at these drawings, but it's kind of plug and play. The only problem is that if panel 63 doesn't show up, we kind of have to send the crane away and send the team home and wait. And so there's a lot of risk to assembling something like this. The structural engineers in London went over to KLH in Austria, and so KLH is the manufacturer. And so if our laser cutter bed size is 36 inches, the CNC machine's bed size is 50 feet by 10 feet, so whatever you can transport on an 18-wheeler. And so they're inspecting the product, which is like this remote village somewhere in Austria. It gets put into these shipping containers. There's 3 of them, and they're going to travel over the Atlantic to the port of Savannah. They're open top. They kept telling me they're open top. I was like, well, what does that mean? And I think there was, water gets in there, apparently. Architects usually don't get too involved into the delivery and logistics of materials coming onto site, but this became my job for like a week, was taking all the weights of all the panels and figuring out how to load the trucks. So we couldn't get an 18-wheeler down the road, so we had to find these weird like hotshot trailers. There's 11 of them, kind of going back and forth from Savannah to Atlanta. This is the kind of precision on the fabrication. We flip milled every piece, so you can get like an 1/8 of an inch tolerance. And so they arrive like really pretty and soft white, Austrian wood. And then this is the installer, Terry. He's very happy, but he probably hasn't gotten to the roof yet. And so these panels and panels are arriving. It's like the biggest spectacle in the neighborhood. The crane's putting together a house. Like, this can't be so. And this is just to show a little context of what's around. This is Terry with one of the biggest pieces. It's a 5-ply CLT panel. The walls are 3-ply, interior and exterior walls. The roof is 5-ply. The floor slab is 7-ply. And then the CLT house sits on top of a concrete box, which is traditionally framed. So it was exciting to see it all done, because the kind of one-to-one model looks very similar to the ambitions of the massing model from Domestic Cats. And I think when working on the ordinary, stuff like this happens. Like if you look at the second gable over and then directly up, it's like an alignment with whatever 2 neighbors over. That's totally not planned, but I think those things kind of just appear when you're working on the ordinary. So this is at the end of 14 days. There's only a few houses built in the U.S. With CLT. The majority, Europe's been doing it for a long time, Australia, Canada, but the first house is in Seattle by an architect named Susan Jones. I worked with 3 different photographers on the project. This one is someone in Atlanta called Patrick Heagney, and it was important to get him into the house just before we handed everything over to the general contractor, who had to dry in and weatherproof the wood. And so I'm showing you these because it's like showing you, this pristine material getting all banged up and looking kind of shitty just after it's installed. And then you see all the brackets and hardware and stuff, but that's all hidden. But you get an idea of what the space is going to look like. And then wood's forgiving, so basically you sand it all, and then we did a stain and seal of the wood, because we can't have yellow wood like this. Ugh. So the second photographer is from Little Rock, Arkansas, named Timothy Hursley, and his idea for shooting the work was to take these lights on the exterior and light the house. This is one of my favorite views. You know, when we're always in Rhino or whatever software, like spinning around, we think we know the project backwards and forwards until the architectural photographer shows you this view that you've kind of never seen before. And this is the corner where you can see the fake brick meets the back facade, which doesn't have the fake brick, so you can really see what happens at the corner. And then again, if you squint your eyes, this probably looks pretty similar to the domestic hats model from the original show. And Hursley's making sure Portman's in the background, who, you know, invented the super atrium inside of Atlanta, not in another city. And it's important to, just kind of, I think, reference his work. So I think the promise of the roof plan is that you can, if we start to build like smaller floor plates and smaller spaces in town neighborhoods, I think the possibility of making a kind of volumetric interior is at stake. And then this is exciting when the faux finishes start to do something else that I think is happening in contemporary culture, which is maybe something like color blocking. So you're standing in a room that looks like concrete, but it's like fake vinyl looking like concrete, and you look through to yellow, through to the black terrazzo. So you get a 55-foot long view of the house, and you also get like maybe a color block sweater from Marnie. Sorry, the third photographer, which I'm just showing all these interior shots, is from London, called NAARO. And she kind of told me that I'm going to stand in all the shots and wear different outfits. And so here I am matching the French chair there. This is, I think, an important image for me because it looks like the Dollhouse. There was a journalist that wrote the first article about the house out of Metropolis magazine, and he titled the article Playing House. And most female architects would be offended by such a claim, but I think it's really exciting because he nailed exactly what I'm doing, which I am just playing house. There's two white spaces in the house. This one's upstairs, that's that terrace exterior porch. And then in the kind of sunken garage basement entry is also white. So this is all like high, shiny gloss, powder-coated panels and a glossy floor. And it's trying not to be a garage. It's more like a gallery. I don't know why she put the buckets. I don't know if she was like saying this roof's gonna leak all the way down to the basement, which it did. And I think I'm just gonna end on these shots from Tim Hursley, and I think that's it. Thank you so much.